So a while back, I started to dip my toes back into the extended lore of Tangled when I started to watch Rapunzel's Tangled Adventures, or whatever it's called. I know they changed the name at one point. But yeah, I realised I was a bit behind the times with all that, and overall, I really enjoyed the show. Tangled's among my favourite Disney Animated Studios films, and of the new revival era, it's probably neck and neck with Zootopia as my overall undisputed favourite film. Loved Eugene, loved Rapunzel, thought she was such a great princess, and I very much enjoyed Tangled's sequel show. I mean, there were some problems I had with it, of course. Talked about some of those in my previous videos. I felt like Cassandra and her whole fall into villainy and then the redemption arc was somewhat bungled. Didn't particularly much like it, as it felt like Rapunzel had to get hit with the idiot stick to make it work. And then there's Varian, and yeah, I made a video on that too. And I just think his villain arc was forced and relied on characters sort of acting out of character to get him into position for a mental breakdown. But that's all done with now. We've covered that. Time to move on. And when I was going through a bunch of comments of those videos and just exploring the fandom on social media in general, I did notice something, and that is Rapunzel as in the main character of the franchise. I wouldn't go so far as to say she's completely hated or anything like that, but at the same time, I think it's pretty clear she does cop a lot of hate. There are vocal parts of the fan base that actively dislike her, and I kind of had a vague idea about it coming into the show. I mean, it's not that out of the ordinary. And you do see this sort of thing where the main protagonist often seems to be disliked by vocal online fans. Miraculous is a premium example of this sort of dynamic if you need more evidence. Anyway, despite me having a bit of knowledge of it going into the show, I was still a little bit shocked. After all, my only experience in the franchise was, at this early stage, the movie. And within the movie itself, I think she comes off quite well. She's kind and sweet and curious with this air of naivety behind her that leaves her susceptible to falling back into her mother's web. She doesn't really seem like a toxic character or person in this film at all, just young and naive, somebody who's freshly experiencing a world that she's never seen before. Her romance with Eugene seems heartfelt and sweet, if a bit rushed, but isn't that Disney tradition? And so I always viewed her character in a very positive way as a result. And so yeah, all of this meant that I was somewhat aware of the dislike for her character among some fans, but I didn't really anticipate just how much dislike there could be. It gets intense at times, if I'm being perfectly honest, like post upon post upon post, just dripping with disdain for this character, my god. And there's really just one massive avenue that this dislike seemed to hone in on, and that is there's this perception that Rapunzel is a toxic character and a toxic friend. Okay, so just get into it, the toxic friend. And this is something I found tossed around quite a lot, especially when used to try to justify Cass turning on Rapunzel and trying to kill her numerous times, and destroy the kingdom, and just hurt a bunch of people along the way. And that's certainly a perspective. There's this idea that Rapunzel is inherently a very selfish person, who intentionally tramples over people's wants and desires. She always thinks she's right, and that only her perspective on things really matters. There's this general belief that Rapunzel is genuinely the worst friend ever, and that the narrative exclusively frames her as being in the right about every little thing. And I will admit, some of those elements are present in the story, but at the same time, I'm struggling to see how this makes her the most toxic character, especially even in her group. Legitimately, how is she any worse than some of the other characters, right? But I guess we want to look at things as a comparison to Cass, okay? That's how it's going down. Okay, so there have been numerous essays and videos and whatnot that have been put out about how Rapunzel is the toxic one in the friendship with Cass. And I mean, I can certainly see where they're coming from in some regards. Rapunzel is by design a deeply naive character who struggles with social cues. Watch season 1 and hell, even in season 2 and 3, many of her storylines revolve around being too pushy or not understanding why somebody might not like her. Like in that episode where she enters the challenge thing, or when she meets Uncle Monty. In the challenge, Cass doesn't want Rapunzel to join. She wants to prove herself to everybody, and then Rapunzel tramples all over that because she doesn't understand and she wants to spend time with her friend. And then at the end they argue, and Rapunzel comes to this understanding that she'd overstepped, and that her lived experience and privilege is different to Cass's. After all, Rapunzel's a beloved princess who's returned from captivity after years and years and years, so of course she's gonna have everybody's love and respect. Except Monty. Whereas Cass, she's a servant, and the daughter of yet another servant. A prominent and important one, yes, but ultimately just that, a servant. And so, the amount that Cass has to work to achieve renown is much higher than Rapunzel would have to work. And on top of that, the consequences for her actions are generally more severe. I mean, remember that time she was going to get sent to a convent? Yikes. I can't imagine Rapunzel's dad sending her off to a convent. So yeah, in season 1 we do see that Rapunzel can struggle with boundaries and understanding where others such as Cass are coming from. And on top of that, she does seem to have this unyielding belief that gets stronger as the seasons go on, that what she decides is the right choice must be the objective best path. And we see this manifest itself a fair bit throughout the show's run. And it most famously makes itself known throughout season 2, a big example being the whole debacle at is it called the Great Tree? The one which left Cass maimed, and the two of them on bad terms as they were both convinced they were right and wouldn't budge. But since Rapunzel holds all the power, Cass ends up feeling marginalized and excluded. So yeah, It's somewhat toxic, not gonna lie. And it's definitely a contributing factor to Cass falling under the sway of Zantiri and betraying Rapunzel at the end of the season when she claims the Moonstone. And this is fine by me. The hero of the tale being part of the reason an ally falls from grace and becomes an enemy, that's compelling writing. Heroes should be flawed at times, otherwise what is compelling about them? Watching a character who's good and pure in every single way is not a good story most of the time. Sometimes it can be good, but mostly not. So you need to offset virtues with flaws, and that's just how it is, and how it should always be in my eyes. So I'm not going to go to my grave defending Rapunzel from every direction. I'm not that much of a fanboy. She has flaws, particularly where listening to her friends is concerned and making them feel seen and valued. But at the same time, I do feel like some of it's a bit overblown. I mean, it is clear that some of these flaws do drive Cass away and contribute to her downfall, but, and that's right, but, that being said, I have noticed something else. That people use these somewhat toxic moments, these personality flaws, as a kind of gotcha. As though every single character, Eugene, the king, Varian's dad, the little girls, and Lance, and yes, Cass, do not have any toxic traits. They claim, oh look, this is why I hate Rapunzel. This is why she sucks and objectively is the worst character in the show. But from my eyes, is Cass not belligerent, rude, and honestly a bit of a bully? She very much strikes me in the way that she interacts with pretty much everybody outside of Rapunzel and her dad as a bully. The type of bully that justifies everything they say with phrases like, oh, I just say it how it is, it's not my fault if you got offended. Spoiler alert, and a helpful hint for life. People that say that, there is a good chance that many of your friends secretly fucking hate you. And so I feel like that, with that context in mind, surely you can't just say that everything rotten in the relationship, within the friendship, could be laid at Rapunzel's feet. In my eyes, Cass is just as toxic. Perhaps not to Rapunzel necessarily, although I do think she can be rather rude to her regardless, and is overly critical of her at times, but to many of the others in the group, and just the town as well. Damn right I said it, I feel like sometimes I'm in crazy town reading these threads. She gets majorly infantilized on all of these boards to an insane degree. Poor little Cassie-washy. Nah, because look, as soon as she gets a lick of power, when she grabs that moonstone, suddenly, whoo, don't need Rapunzel anymore. I've got superpowers, and so I don't need anybody anymore. And does she go off to find her destiny and be a cool hero saving the day? Nah. Her inner bully comes to the surface. She hurts former friends, she hurts former allies, seemingly without regrets, until she realizes she's been used. I guess that even with being raised by the captain of the guards, the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. Q flaming me in the comments, bring it on, I'm not afraid. Go on, you know you want to. I honestly just think a lot of this is completely overblown. I always thought the tragedy was that all of this could have been avoided if both Cass and Rapunzel were better communicators and better friends to one another. Is that not the point of season 2 and 3? No? And so in my eyes, do you know what the actual toxic trait that Rapunzel exhibits is? I think it's her unyielding belief in Cass's redemption arc. When Cass keeps attacking them and the kingdom again and again and again, despite Rapunzel's other friends and subjects getting hurt and put in danger, she exhibits toxic stupidity, toxic hopium, and in many ways is a massive victim of bad writing. During the course of season 3, I think the writing in many ways goes off the rails, and so much of it just doesn't feel right. Rapunzel, who we saw put the greater good of the kingdom above her promise to Varian in season 1, is suddenly willing to let it all burn down for a chance at Cass being redeemed, risking everybody's lives, homes, and livelihoods. And that would be fine if it was acknowledged. But the story goes out of its way to show you that she was right for trusting Cass, for continuing to believe in her. And so I think it leaves the audience feeling unsatisfied, and thus can sour you on Rapunzel and her storyline overall. And I do think that's part of the reason for much of Rapunzel's hate in general. Rapunzel as the main character is going to be the character who drives the story, and early on, season 1 specifically, if Rapunzel blunders or makes a mistake, it's acknowledged openly by characters, and she'd address it, accept it, and learn. Season 2, there's less of that, but it felt by design, and you see the consequences of her decisions and choices play out with Cass's fall. It's less overt, and it's less acknowledged through the dialogue, but you see it play out through the story. It's a show don't tell sort of thing. And I do think that some people either miss it or just don't find it satisfying enough. And then, as I said, season 3, it just lacks consequences overall. The narrative twists itself into a pretzel to show that she's right and made the right choices. Like when she has to use time travel to make Eugene agree with her that they shouldn't be giving up on Cass. Yikes. And I'm convinced that this played a big part in the souring towards Rapunzel, because nobody likes unflawed characters. They're just not compelling whatsoever. And so suddenly, you retroactively look back on everything else and start to apply things that maybe aren't applicable. But yeah, beyond that, I don't really have anything else to say. Flame me in the comments if you dare, because of course these have all been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about the toxicity debate? Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? Anything else you'd like to add? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.